So I would like to start, like Zodiac Killer Project actually, as you said, has been transformed like personal, like creative frustration in something that is narrative substance at the end. So I would like to ask you how all this started for you, like a project, when you did decide actually that you wanted to tell, something different about the Zodiac case, and if it was difficult for you to do the documentary in that way.
Sure. So I spent a couple of years trying to make a documentary about the Zodiac killer for a few reasons. Like I'd been fascinated by the case for a while, but also sort of surprised that there was no definitive documentary on the subject, given that it's such a high-profile case. And I'd found this book that I desperately wanted to adapt into this documentary, and was in negotiation for the rights to the book, and made the mistake, with hindsight, of essentially kind of making the whole film in my head while this negotiation was still ongoing. So when the negotiations fell through and we didn't get the rights to the book, I was left with this idea for a true crime documentary that I now couldn't actually make. And it's not the first time I've had a project fall through halfway. I think anyone who works in documentary is used to that experience. But it was the first time I really couldn't let it go. Like, much as I tried to lick my wounds and move on, I found myself just stewing on it. And not only that, but boring friends to death by telling them at length all of these little sequences I'd imagined, these like specific scenes and shots that I'd wanted to shoot for the film. And at a certain point, I started to think of that as potentially an interesting subject for film, like what it is when you have a creative idea that's unrealizable. And so Zodiac Killer Project was born of that idea, like what it would be to make a film about a film that could never exist. And hopefully what emerges through that is also something that's, about true crime itself, which in my world of documentary is pretty inescapable. So I realized in the process that I had a lot of thoughts on true crime that I could talk about. And yeah, what I now have is this odd kind of mirror image film that's a long way from the film I wanted to make, but something else entirely that I'm very pleased with.
Yeah, actually, I found it like very, like you said, very clever and also, captivating, because it leaves you with wanting to know even more of what you have wanted to say. And also, like you said, you had to do that without having, I think like the source material, can we call it like that?
Yeah.
So you actually, the film is been dissecting and mocks like the true crime conventions. And so while also you are actually, you're harnessing them for the suspense and the humor that I was talking about before. So actually, I think, did you find that actually using the, can we say, mechanics that you have used during your documentary has helped you to actually amplify this ability also to captivate the audience or mesmerize the audience? Like, I'm telling you something, but I'm not showing that. So yeah, how was this balance for you?
Yeah, it was an odd thing, because obviously what happens again and again in the film that I've made is I'm gesturing to something that would have happened in the unmade film, but because I don't have the rights to the source material, I can't really describe what that thing would have been. So instead I'm saying, it would have made you feel like this. This would have been a suspenseful scene. This would have been dramatic. And the audience has to just kind of trust me that it would have been. But what was fascinating to me is, yeah, even with all those absences, I still had this sense of like what each scene needed, like, and how the dramatic arc of the film was working, even in the absence of any actual content. So yeah, I think it's been quite good training for like thinking about dramatic structure, because everything's boiled down to just the most kind of prosaic terms possible, where it's like, we need something dramatic here, we need like a pause here. And yeah, finding that rhythm without any actual material to grapple with was a very unusual challenge.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And actually I think you in some ways also purposely withhold some details of about the Zodiac case, and also, like you said, highlight the absence of what you have. So what was interesting for me, how did you can create this engagement? I know you said you were interested in the story from the beginning and you cannot found the material, but how do you hope actually also the viewers can feel these gaps that you've made in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the highest praise I can receive for the film is when people come out of it and say like, oh God, there was such an incredible story. I see why you wanted to make that documentary. And I'm like, how do you know it was an incredible story? I didn't give you any of the actual details, but people really do fill in the gaps for themselves. I think partly because obviously true crime has become so formulaic that often without even telling people what happens in any given scene, they kind of have a sense of what happens this far into a true crime documentary. They kind of know the narrative beats of it at this point. And that gives you a lot of license, I think, to withhold, because people are so used to the basic kind of plot elements of a true crime story, especially one obviously as ubiquitous as the Zodiac killer.
Exactly. Actually, like you said, true crime now tends to preempt this criticism, also incorporating this kind of ethical debate, we can say, something that I didn't find like in your ways of showing the documentary. So I found that aspect really new, actually, very refreshing. So did you see that this kind of reflexity that you put in the documentary can be a sign also like of a way of make this genre, so true crime, more mature maybe, or to have people not to, how can I say that, like not be fascinated only by, images and even cruel images that we are used to, like also in documentary, not only television in general. So what do you think about it? Can be more true to show a documentary in that way? In which sense?
I mean, I think I was coming at it from a very, I've worked in documentary for like 10 years. I have a lot of friends who do the same thing. So I'd had all of these conversations 1,000 times about the ethics of true crime, because everyone I know, the only thing they can get made is true crime. And I really wanted to come at it from that kind of industry perspective, partly because I think the sorts of self-reflexive tendencies that do exist in true crime are usually about the audience. So, you'll have a 3-part true crime series that's full of all these like gruesome, macabre details, and then there'll be a little 10-minute section at the end where they kind of turn the lens back on the audience and they go like, but why do you want to watch this? What is it inside of you that's so sick and wants to see all of these gruesome things? And I'm not saying there isn't a validity to that and that isn't a question worth asking, but to me that always feels like it's completely letting off the hook the people who are actually churning out all of this material, which is us. And so I really wanted the film to kind of focus more on that and think about like the business model of true crime and why it's so endlessly replicable. And really just to talk about it in the way that I think the industry already does among itself. It's just that we don't talk about it like that publicly. So, for all that the movie is a little bit my movie is a little bit sort of flippant, I think it's hard not to become that way when you're just sort of existing in this ecosystem day in, day out.
Actually, I find it interesting. So, since you have like many friends or people that work in your field as well, do you think what kind of conversation maybe can you make like about in general the documentary scene? I mean, in terms of actually having found only maybe for these true crime stories, but not maybe for kind of different stories to tell, maybe naturalistic or, something different. What do you think about that? I mean, was it like a choice for you, true crime, or you wanted to do like something very different at the very beginning, and the conversation that you find more interesting also with your friends?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, it's like when I approached wanting to make a Zodiac Killer documentary, it wasn't like a totally cynical decision, like, this is where the money is, so this is the kind of thing I'm going to make. It's more like, if you have 5 ideas, it's immediately very clear that the one that fits into like a true crime mold is the one that's going to be easiest to get made. So you don't even have to be thinking very cynically for that to just be the thing you end up preferentializing. And yeah, in my case, it was exactly that. It was like, I was a sort of avid true crime viewer, like so many people are. And that case is one that I'd been fascinated by since I was probably like 15. So it seemed like just kind of a happy, meeting of opportunity and desire. But the mirror image of that is, if you have an idea that is much more abstract or verite or whatever else, there isn't the obvious path to get it made. And I suppose I'm lucky that the thing I've wound up making, which is sort of a film about true crime rather than a true crime film, is just about close enough to that it's still, almost, if you squint, it kind of fits the model. And I'm sure, we benefit from having the title Zodiac Killer Project because it sounds like a true crime film, even if people who watch it expecting that might be, at the very least, surprised. But yeah, I think it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to take total cynicism for people just to kind of slowly bend towards the thing that they're actually going to be able to make a living off.
Yeah. And in general, if like in alternative reality where Lafferty Estate maybe offered you the rights today, would you do the documentary again, or would you change something?
For a long time, the answer would have been yes. Like right through shooting this film, I still strongly felt like I wished I was making that other film. Okay. And I think it was only really once this film premiered and suddenly I could release it into the world and see people react to it that I finally felt like, okay, no, I'm at peace with the thing I've made. And not only that, but I think I'm so true crimed out for now that the thought of going back into that world right away is horrendous. But never say never. Yeah, if it came back around suddenly, I'm sure I might be tempted.
Okay, and having actually spent many years immersed in both making this and also kind of critiquing documentary forms that are different, and also I found very interesting what you said about the Netflix series about Dahmer. Mm-hmm. And so I would like to ask you, what do you think about the true story? I mean, I think you have been deep in studying it and, trying to find out what was the sense of the story, that it can be defined like a cold case maybe. Mm-hmm. So I would like to ask you, what do you think about it? The true story, what it personally, what was for you, what it meant for you, and what you wanted also to show through your words in the documentary and the location also that you choose.
The true story of the Zodiac Killer, yeah, in particular? Exactly. I mean, it's an odd one because it's for me, the Zodiac Killer case, if I try and psychoanalyze why I was drawn to it, I think true crime for me, the aspect that's most appealing is sort of the puzzle solving one. The idea that there's this vast accumulation of evidence, and if you could only put it together in the right way, you'd have an answer. And I think that tickles the part of my brain that enjoys problem solving and puzzles and so on. And I live in East London. My office is right near where Jack the Ripper's crimes took place, and there's all these Jack the Ripper tours that I constantly walk past, and that's another case where it's been 150 years and it feels like you should be able to now piece it together and find an answer. So I think it was partly that, but also it's something about just how well known it is that it allows you to kind of push into stranger areas because you can trust that people have a kind of basic familiarity with the case. Even people who don't know any of the details of it kind of know, like, he wrote letters to the newspapers and maybe about the codes that he sent out and so on. So you're building on a kind of baseline of tropes and iconography that you can then play with. Yeah, all of which felt appealing to me in making a film that would be kind of about true crime without having to spell out every little detail.
Yeah. I would like to ask you, like, for last question, what are your interests, like, beside documentary? Like, if you have also, I don't know, maybe like kind of heroes in the field, like some people that you really, really appreciate from the present or the past, and also if you have like favorite movies or like a movie that for you has meant something like inspirational.
I'm always really bad at this, but I feel like, I mean, the odd thing about this movie, because the film, although it's sort of about true crime, it obviously doesn't really look like a true crime film. It's full of all these like very glacially paced, locked off shots of landscapes. And so even in an unlikely setting, it became also a way for me to homage all my favorite like avant-garde filmmakers and landscape filmmakers. So I was thinking a lot about James Benning and John Smith and Deborah Stratman, filmmakers like that, when we were actually out there shooting it, even though the film we've made is not particularly like any of their work, and certainly not as good. But yeah, no, I mean, I love all those kinds of movies, landscape films and structural films. And this is my little like quiet tribute.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing with us your story and how you made Zodiac Killer project. And you know, I think it's really nice to see a project like that. Like, it's very, very different from what I have seen before. So thank you for, you know, your artistic view on the work. Thank you so much.